Meet Ivar the Boneless, a warlord so feared his enemies thought he was the wrath of God himself. A cripple carried into battle on a shield, a genius who broke kingdoms, and a king whose death was so revolting that monks wrote only one line: he died of a sudden and hideous disease. This wasn't just death. This was humiliation, a body collapsing, flesh wasting away, a stench so foul it was seen as God's revenge. You don't learn this in history class, but even in the Viking age, a man's death was his legacy. And Ivar's legacy was decay. So how did one of the most feared men in Europe become remembered not for his victories, but for the smell of his rotting body? Let's find out. The first horror of Ivar's story comes from his nickname, Boneless. What kind of name is that? Was he born cursed? Was he crippled? Or was it something far worse? The sagas tell us his mother was a seeress, a woman who saw fate itself. She warned her husband Ragnar Lothbrok not to touch her for 3 nights after returning from war. If he did, she said, their child would be born with a terrible affliction. But Ragnar ignored the warning. Consumed by lust, he broke the rule, and their son, Ivar, was born. Not with strong bones like a warrior, but with cartilage where bones should have been. Imagine it, a child soft, fragile, and cursed from birth. Here's something that will blow your mind. Vikings often killed weak infants. So how did a baby like this survive? And not just survive, but become the most feared warlord of his age? Modern theories try to explain it. Some say brittle bone disease. Others say he was lame, unable to walk, which is why he was carried into battle on a shield. But wait, it gets stranger. Some historians think Boneless had nothing to do with bones at all. It may have meant he was like a serpent, flexible, cunning, unpredictable. And here's the twist. Some believe the name didn't come from birth, but from his death. That the hideous disease that ate him alive left him so wasted, so dissolved that he looked like a man with no bones left. So was Ivar born cursed, or did he rot into his name? That mystery is what makes him so terrifying. If his name wasn't terrifying enough, his origin story was pure nightmare fuel. Ivar's father was Ragnar Lothbrok, the Viking hero, the man of 100 raids. But Ragnar's story ended in the most gruesome way possible. Captured by King Aella of Northumbria, Ragnar was thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. Imagine it. Hundreds of serpents slithering, striking, sinking their fangs into his flesh. Ragnar screaming, poison foaming in his veins as the king of the Vikings was eaten alive by vipers. His body convulsed, his skin turned black, and the smell of venom filled the air. And Ivar never forgot. Here's something that will blow your mind. Revenge in the Viking world wasn't just personal, it was sacred. To let Ragnar's death go unpunished would have been seen as weakness. To avenge him meant fate itself was on Ivar's side. So in 865, Ivar and his brothers raised the largest Viking force ever seen. The terrified English called it the Great Heathen Army. And it wasn't here for silver, it wasn't here for plunder, it was here for blood. This was not a raid, this was an invasion. Thousands of warriors, ships packed with steel and fire, landing in waves on English shores. A human flood sent to drown kingdoms, and at the center of it all, a man who couldn't even walk without help. A cripple carried on a shield, a commander who ruled with his mind, not his legs. But here's the sick twist. The very thing that made Ivar weak also made him terrifying. He wasn't fighting with muscle, he was fighting with rage, strategy, and a cold desire for revenge that made him more dangerous than any sword. And soon, the kings of England would find out just how far that rage could go. In 866, Ivar's great heathen army struck the heart of Northumbria. Their target, York, one of the richest and most powerful cities in England. The defenders never stood a chance. Ivar's men stormed the walls, poured through the gates, and within hours, the city fell. The jewel of the north was in Viking hands, but the real horror was yet to come. The rival English kings, Ella and Osbert, tried to take it back. They rallied their men, marched on York, and walked straight into Ivar's trap. The Vikings crushed them, cutting down the English like wheat before the scythe. Both kings were captured, and for Ella, the man who murdered Ragnar in the snake pit, Ivar had a special punishment. Everyone knows the Vikings were brutal, but what Ivar did to King Ella was beyond brutal. It was body horror carved into legend. The sagas say Ivar performed the blood eagle. If you've never heard of it, brace yourself. Ella was tied down. His ribs were hacked open from behind, his lungs pulled out and spread like wings across his back. his body, still twitching, displayed for everyone to see. Imagine the scene, a king's chest cavity ripped open, his own lungs flapping in the wind like a grotesque pair of wings. But you know what? We don't even know if the blood eagle really happened. Some historians think it was exaggerated or invented to make Ivar look more terrifying. But whether it was literal or not doesn't even matter. The story itself was the weapon. This isn't in the sagas, but terror was Ivar's most powerful tool. Killing Aela wasn't enough. He had to turn his death into theater, into legend, into a warning carved into flesh. And it worked. From that day, Ivar wasn't just a Viking raider. He was the butcher of kings. A man whose name alone could break the will of armies. But wait, it gets worse, because York wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. If you thought Ella's blood eagle was the worst of it, think again. Because Ivar's cruelty didn't stop at kings who wronged his father. Even saints weren't safe. In 869, the great heathen army marched into East Anglia. Their target was King Edmund, a ruler remembered for his piety and faith. But to Ivar, he was just another trophy. The story goes like this. Edmund was captured, tied to a tree, and scourged until his skin was raw. But that was only the beginning. Then came the arrows. One after another, Viking archers loosed their bows, turning Edmund into a human target. Arrows pierced his arms, his chest, his legs, until, as one chronicler wrote, he bristled with arrows like a hedgehog. Imagine it, a king pinned to a tree, his body quivering under the weight of dozens of shafts, a living pincushion, his screams echoing through the woods. And still, Ivar wasn't done. Edmund was finally dragged down and beheaded. His head tossed aside, his mutilated body left behind as carrion. But here's where it gets truly insane. This wasn't just execution. This was theater, a performance designed to terrify anyone who dared resist. The message was clear. Defy Ivar, and your fate will be worse than death. Most history books skip over this, but this wasn't random cruelty. It was psychological warfare. By turning a Christian king into a grotesque spectacle, Ivar broke the spirit of his enemies before the next battle even began. The truly terrifying part is, in just a few years, Ivar had shattered 3 of England's 4 great kingdoms. He wasn't just raiding villages anymore. He was redrawing the map of England in blood. Here's the part nobody expected, because terror alone wasn't enough. Ivar wanted total control, and his next move was even more chilling. By now, Ivar wasn't just killing kings, he was making them. After the fall of York, he installed a puppet ruler named Egbert to govern Northumbria in his name. Think about that. A Viking cripple carried on a shield, now pulling the strings of English royalty like some medieval mob boss. But the really chilling part is what he did next. In 868, Ivar marched into Nottingham. The Mercian king begged for help, and none other than Alfred the Great, the future savior of England, came with his brother and an army of Wessex men to push the Vikings out. You'd expect a bloody clash, right? Shields smashing, swords clashing, and another king on his knees. But no, that's not what happened. You see, Ivar didn't fight. He pulled his army back, just walked away. It sounds weak, but it wasn't. It was brilliant. By refusing battle, he denied Alfred his victory. He left his enemies stewing in fear, never knowing when the axe would fall again. What if I told you, sometimes the most terrifying move isn't slaughter, it's silence. Fear itself became Ivar's sharpest weapon, and his silence wouldn't last long. By 870, Ivar's ambitions reached even farther. He wasn't satisfied with England. He wanted Scotland too. So he and his ally, Olaf the White, set their sights on Dumbarton Rock, the mighty fortress of the Strathclyde Kingdom. Perched high on volcanic cliffs, it was thought to be untouchable. But not to Ivar. The siege dragged on for months. Supplies ran out. Starvation set in. Inside the fortress, people resorted to eating their horses, even their dogs. Outside, Ivar's men waited, patient as wolves. When the gates finally fell, the Vikings poured in. Dumbarton was burned, its people slaughtered or chained in irons. And the spoils? Ivar's fleet returned to Dublin sagging under the weight of plunder. Gold, silver, treasure, and slaves packed so tightly in the ships that they became part of the cargo. Imagine the sight, ships groaning not just with loot, but with human misery. By 871, chroniclers called him King of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain. A cripple carried on a shield had become Emperor of the North Sea. And just when you think he couldn't rise any higher, at the very height of his power, when he seemed invincible, Ivar met an enemy he couldn't outthink or outfight, his own body. By 871, Ivar wasn't just a Viking chieftain anymore, he was the Viking king. Chronicles called him King of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain. Think about that. A man who may not have even been able to walk was now master of 2 islands. A cripple carried on a shield had outsmarted and outlasted every rival. His enemies called him a demon. His allies called him a king. At his peak, Ivar was untouchable. His army controlled half of England. His fleets ruled the Irish Sea. His name alone could make kingdoms tremble. Everyone called him a king. But in truth, he was already a prisoner of his body, a cripple carried on a shield, pretending to rule the seas, while his flesh was preparing to betray him. And that's the irony. The higher he climbed, the harder he rotted. His victories already smelled like failure. The year was 873. The Chronicles record just one chilling line. The king died of a sudden and hideous disease. Thus, it pleased God. That's it. No saga, no funeral pyre, just the brutal truth. But wait, it gets so much worse. The disease ate him alive. Flesh collapsing, bones wasting away, a stench so foul his enemies swore it was divine punishment. To the Christian monks, his rotting body was proof that God himself had taken vengeance on the pagan scourge. Imagine the scene. The king of all Norse, once carried on a shield in glory, now lying helpless, his skin blackening, his flesh oozing, the air around him reeking of decay. A warlord reduced to a walking corpse before finally dropping into filth. Here's the truly sick part. The sagas couldn't accept it. They rewrote his death entirely. They claimed his body never decayed, that it was buried on the English coast, magically preserved, guarding against invasion. According to the legend, his corpse stayed incorruptible for centuries until William the Conqueror burned it before invading England. So which was it? Did Ivar rot into slime, or did he defy decay itself? The answer doesn't matter. What matters is that his enemies remembered him as a stinking corpse, and his people remembered him as a zombie king. Even in death, his body was still at war. And the truth is worse than either story, because if one Viking king could rot into legend, what his raiders did to their slaves was far more horrific. You'd think a death that hideous would be the end of Ivar's story. But no, even his corpse became a weapon. To the Christian monks who wrote the annals, Ivar's body was proof of divine punishment. They wanted everyone to know their God had struck him down, rotting him from the inside out. His legacy was filth, disease, and the stench of defeat. But the Norse sagas told a very different story. They erased the rot, replaced it with a miracle. They said Ivar's body never decayed, that it was buried on the English coast as a magical guardian. For centuries, no enemy could land while his bones still rested there. And this is where it gets twisted. Both sides used his corpse as propaganda. Christians turned him into a cautionary tale of divine justice. Pagans turned him into a saint of decay, a zombie king too powerful for rot. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but the war for Ivar didn't end with his death. It just changed battlefields, from the shield wall to the written word. Fast forward 1,000 years, and Ivar's story is still being rewritten. Novels, games, TV shows, his legend never really died. But here's the twist. The Ivar most people know today isn't the one who rotted alive. It's the TV version, a tortured anti-hero, a crippled genius whose pain drives his cruelty, a character you can almost sympathize with. Sounds familiar, right? Because that's what Hollywood does. They take a walking corpse remembered for his stench and turn him into binge-worthy drama. By sanitizing the rot, they strip away the horror that made him unforgettable. The real Ivar wasn't remembered for brotherly feuds or clever one-liners. He was remembered for dying like garbage left to spoil. For a body so foul, monks called it the vengeance of God. And that's the nightmare truth. When the most feared Viking in history finally fell, he wasn't remembered for the kingdoms he broke, but for the smell of his own decay. So there you have it, Ivar the Boneless, cripple, conqueror, corpse, a king who rotted alive. And if you think his death was revolting, wait until you see what his Vikings did to their slaves. Tortures so vile they make his own decay look merciful. Click here if you dare.